Yo, what's up guys, welcome back to another video. This is a reaction to everyday objects today versus 100 years ago. This is going to be a weird little contrast because, I mean, what, in 1923, what everyday items can I think of what they would have had? I can't... Typewriters, probably. That'd be an everyday object, I don't know. But I don't really know what everyday objects we would have had. Bicycles? Not bicycles. The ones with the big wheel at the front. Tricycles. No, I don't know what they're called. They're the ones with just one wheel. I don't really know, to be honest. But it's gonna be fascinating to sort of look and compare because it's only 100 years time in human history. That's nothing. But yeah, it's gonna be wild to look back and see the differences in everyday items. Like today, it'd be phones. My head's just gone. A backpack. I mean, to be fair, I carry a backpack with me all the time. And then just things like, I guess, like computers and stuff, right? Having a fridge, and then that's not really an item. I can't think now. Because everyday things that I use would count towards it. But yeah, it'll be a big contrast, and we're gonna see. But links are also in the description to my Patreon, where you can see reactions I can't post to YouTube. And yeah, let's just jump into this.
Action Road is proud to partner with Legacy Box. Watch until the end of this video to find out more about digitizing your family's irreplaceable memories, and then visit legacybox.com/recollection for an incredible 55% off.
Damn. Getting his money. Oh, so they're going to directly compare things that were in the 1920s to now. That's going to be interesting because I've seen... I remember there was an old iron in my old house and it was just metal. It was so weird. It was like very heavy, just metal. And I guess what you would do is heat up the metal? I don't know, actually.
The iron was typically made of cast iron and had a flat base for pressing clothes.
And I guess you just heat up this area, right? You'd maybe put it on a fire or something.
To heat the iron, it was placed on a stove or a charcoal heater until it reached the desired temperature. There were also some electrical irons at this time that you could plug into a light socket.
There were?
You could then
What?
iron your clothes by applying pressure to remove wrinkles and creases.
Damn.
The ironing board was also pretty simple and was usually a foldable surface made of wood which you could lay your clothes across for ironing.
Toasters. Would they have had toasters back then? They probably wouldn't, would they? I mean, there's electricity, so...
Electric toasters were starting to gain popularity
They
during
were.
the 1920s.
You know what? I wouldn't have guessed that. I wouldn't have assumed toasters and electric irons and electric toasters would have been a thing in the 1920s. I'm gonna be honest. That's a surprise to me.
They consisted of two metal heating elements, one on each side, into which slices of bread could be placed. You would manually push down bread into the toaster, and the heating elements would toast the bread evenly on both sides. Once toasting was complete, the bread would pop up due to a spring mechanism.
Crazy. Telephone. Now that's changed for sure.
Telephones in the 1920s were mostly rotary dial phones. When making a call, the user would pick up the handset and listen for a dial tone. To dial a number, they would insert their finger into a rotating dial, corresponding to the desired number, and rotate it until it reached the finger stop. The dial then returned to its original position, signaling the number to the central exchange.
Wholly different now. Shaving or razors. I have no idea. I mean, they would have probably looked similar years, like 100 years ago, but they wouldn't have like this thing on the front, for example. I don't. Would they have used like shaving cream in this day as well in the 1920s? I don't know. Would that have even been invented at that point? Probably just soap, right?
In the 1920s, safety razors were commonly used for shaving. These razors had a protective guard that shielded most of the blade, reducing the risk of cuts.
Oh.
You simply inserted a double-edged razor blade into the razor head, and then you could shave by running the razor across the skin.
You know what? This probably would be higher quality, to be honest. Bathing suits.
Bathing suits during the 1920s were typically made of wool, which was heavy and didn't dry
What? Of wool? Oh my days. That would be like wearing a flipping bulletproof vest or something in terms of the weight after you're like gone in the water.
quickly. Women's bathing suits covered most of the body, some with long skirts, which were very modest. Men's bathing suits were a little more revealing, but still covered much of the body compared to modern swimwear.
The drip, man. Cars, okay.
Cars in the 1920s were powered by an internal combustion engine and fueled with gasoline. They had a basic manual transmission system, which required the driver to shift gears manually using a clutch. Cars had mechanical brakes operated by foot pedals and often had wooden or metal bodies mounted onto a steel frame.
I have no idea how they would have looked in these in the 1920s.
Refrigerators during this time were basically just ice boxes. They were insulated wooden or metal cabinets
What?
that held large blocks of ice to keep the interior cool.
Oh,
As the
wow.
ice melted, a drip pan would collect the water, which needed to be emptied on a regular basis. The ice had to be replenished daily to maintain the cooler temperature that
Wow, so it wasn't a fridge at all. It was just an ice with like a sort of insulated area.
kept food fresh.
Damn. That is crazy. Music players.
Phonographs and gramophones
I mean, this. Oh, there we go.
were the primary music players in the 1920s. They used hand-cranked mechanisms to rotate a turntable. A needle attached to the tone arm would then make contact with the record's grooves, amplifying the sound through a large horn-shaped speaker.
I still don't really get. I don't get how these like, necessarily work. I think these are such cool inventions because how does a needle and a little disc make the music it does? There's obviously videos out there that will explain, but I don't really understand it. I think these are so fascinating, like in terms of how they make the sound that they produce and all that sort of stuff. And they're cool. Like they're cool to look at as well. Cameras. Oh god, this is gonna be a big change. I mean, they're all big changes. That's what am I saying?
Cameras in the 1920s were analog devices and used film for capturing images. They had basic manual controls that focused the lenses and adjusted the exposure. The photographer would load a roll of film into the camera, and after taking photos, they would then need to have the film developed to see the pictures.
Oh, these would be like the ones that are like fully upwards. I don't know what they're called, but they're massive for starters. What are they called? I mean, they're still called strollers or prams, but basically just this, but a much bigger version and looking a lot more formal from what I'd remember.
Strollers in the 20s were pretty basic and had large wheels that helped with maneuverability.
Massive.
They were often made of wood or metal and had fabric seats for the baby. These strollers had no advanced features like reclining seats or shock absorption, so the child would get quite jostled around while on a walk.
Poor kids. Poor kids. Football helmets, okay. I'm assuming in these times there was a lot less safety, so it probably wasn't as big.
Football helmets from this time period don't
Oh my god, that is mental. That's so small. Oh, mate.
compare at all to modern helmets. This early protective headwear was made of leather and provided really limited protection.
Leather?
Players wore them mainly to protect against cuts and bruises, rather than any significant head impacts.
Wow. That is brutal, man. Dollar bill.
The US dollar bill during the 1920s had a similar design to today's currency, but some were considered certificates.
You know what? It looks very similar, to be fair.
had a similar design to today's currency, but some were considered certificates and had larger sizes, while others were banknotes that were issued by national banks and featured different portraits of historical figures. These were still paper notes that represented a specific denomination of money and could be used as a form of payment, just like coins from the era.
Would they have had plumbing systems at this point? That might be a really dumb question. I assume they probably would have, but it would have been very new.
By the 1920s, American building codes required indoor bathrooms in all new single-family residential construction, so outhouses were replaced with toilets that used a flushing mechanism, but they were not as efficient as modern toilets. They required gravity and more water per flush, and they often had a pull chain or handle that released water into the bowl. The tanks were sometimes set higher than what we are used to, which helped to provide the toilet with more force, but some models were tankless and used a pressure valve to provide the water power.
Damn. Flashlight.
Flashlights in the 1920s had become essential tools for any household. There were basically two styles, the tubular handheld one and a lantern version. They both used incandescent bulbs and were powered by batteries, both of which were considerably weaker than what we're used to today. Some flashlights still flickered or flashed, as the name flashlight suggests, but over time they became more reliable.
Crazy thing is, I've never even owned a flashlight. It's wild, right? That's on my phone as well. It's obviously not as powerful, but that's why I use it for. I'll use my phone for I'll use the torch on my phone. How can this change that much? I mean, I'm assuming this is probably going to be the most similar. Maybe just rougher paper, more rough on the skin, should I say.
Toilet paper during the 1920s was, believe it or not, available in rolls, similar to today. Led by the Scott Company, rolls of toilet paper were first used by the wealthy, while people without the means may have used pages from the latest Sears Roebuck catalog to freshen up. The paper was typically made of low-quality paper and was not the soft, modern toilet paper we now know. Charmin, however, would be introduced in 1928, bringing soft-touch toilet paper to the masses.
That must have been revolutionary, man. If you're going from using newspaper or like paper from books or newspapers or whatever to then actual roll, yeah, that's a big change, man. A big change. Calculator.
Calculators during the 1920s were primarily just a mechanical device. They often used gears and dials for numeric.
They're flipping huge. Dude, this is one of the crazier ones. That is mental to me. They're so big, and now you can get them on your phone or just small little calculators and stuff.
Computation. And if you had a complex calculation, it still required a much more manual effort.
See, these are things that we for sure take for granted, right? Having things like calculators and all that, you don't even think twice about it, but this is how they used to have to do it.
These machines looked a lot like cash registers, and they were sometimes called adding machines. It would be some time before the computing power was increased, and the size of these machines decreased to resemble the calculators of today.
So how come there's multiple numbers on this? Is it because once you press the number, it's down? So you could only go up to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 digits, right? Vacuums.
Vacuum cleaners in the 1920s were becoming a much more common appliance in the home, but they were usually large and quite heavy machines. Hoover was at the forefront of making them so popular. Following World War I, they introduced
Wait, Hoover was a brand name for the vacuum. So does anyone call vacuum cleaners Hoovers in the US? Because in the UK, that's what I grew up calling them. I grew up calling them Hoovers. And it wasn't a brand, it was just what they were called. But I guess that comes from the brand here, right? Unless maybe Hoover was the English way of saying it and they just called the brand Hoover or something. That's a fascinating thing to me too.
An aluminum body, an on-off switch, and an agitator brush that cleaned carpets better. The vacuum was one of the many new devices marketed in the 1920s that promised to liberate middle-class women from the drudgery of housework.
I mean, before that must have been hard-ass work. I mean, with a vacuum, for me, it's hard work. So without a vacuum, oh, mate. no way they had blenders back in the back 100 years ago.
Blenders, as we know them today, got their start in 1922 when Stephen Poplawski devised a machine for making malts and milkshakes for soda fountains. The concept of blending or mixing ingredients manually was still prevalent, and people found that with a blender they could save time and mix things up better than if they used a hand-operated mixer. Hamilton Beach would go on to develop their own version that worked to improve the design made famous by Poplawski.
Crazy.
Overall, technology has come a long way since the 1920s, and these objects have undergone significant advancements to become more efficient and convenient tools that make our lives better every single day.
It would be so fascinating to go back in time and to just see how different the world looked with these differences. Flipping hell, man. The toaster was a work of art. I love how they tried to make even the most simplest of things for everyday use still beautiful. Well, there we go, man. I mean, it's so fascinating to look at same things that they had 100 years ago, but how different they looked and stuff like that. But hopefully you found this interesting. Let me know your thoughts, and until next time, peace.